My name is James Carter. I'm 63 years old, and I never thought I'd live long enough to feel my own son look me in the eyes and tell me I wasn't welcome at the most important day of his life, a day I dreamed about since the moment. I held him in my arms, a day I imagined sitting proudly in the front row, watching him build a new chapter, but instead I stood in the doorway of his apartment listening to him say, "Dad, it's better if you don't come," and those 6 words felt like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed the air out of me, because a father can handle distance, disagreements, arguments, even disrespect, but being erased from your child's wedding cuts deeper than bone. It all began when he got engaged to a young woman named Lena, a polished, confident, social climbing perfectionist who believed reputation mattered more than relationships. And from the very beginning, I could tell she looked at me the way people look at an unwanted stain on a fancy tablecloth, something to hide, something to cover, something that didn't fit her shiny, picture-perfect world. And slowly, like water wearing down stone, she convinced my son that I was too simple, too old-fashioned, too embarrassing, and not the right image for the wedding she wanted. A wedding she described as elegant and elevated, as if I wasn't her fiancé's father, but some random inconvenience who would ruin her dream. For years, I had raised my boy alone after his mother passed, worked double shifts, fixed late-night fevers, attended his school plays, coached his little league team, and kept every birthday tradition alive, and never once did I imagine he'd choose someone else's comfort over my presence. But love makes people blind, and he let her feed him lies until the day he finally said them aloud. "Dad, we're keeping the wedding small. It's mostly her family. It's for the best if you sit this one out." And I felt the floor slip from under me, not because I was angry, but because I realized he didn't see me anymore. Still, I didn't yell, didn't beg, didn't argue. Instead, I simply nodded, walked out quietly, and let him believe he had made a reasonable decision, because sometimes silence carries more truth than shouting ever could. In the days leading up to the wedding, I replayed everything in my mind. The nights I stayed up helping him study, the afternoons I spent fixing his bike, the times he called me his hero, and it hurt to see how easily a hero becomes a burden in the hands of someone who rewrites the story. But life has a way of circling back. And it began with a phone call from the wedding coordinator, a polite young woman who had accidentally sent an email to the wrong address, my address containing the full guest list, which included more than 200 people, not a small family gathering like my son claimed. And not only that, but Lena had added a note beside my name: "Do not allow entry. Groom agrees," and below that, "He's not presentable. Keep him away from photos." For a long moment, I stared at the screen, letting the cruelty settle, letting the truth burn away the last pieces of doubt, and for the first time I understood it wasn't just my son's choice, it was her design. But fate hadn't revealed everything yet, because later that same day, the coordinator called again, her voice shaky, and said, "Mr. Carter, I think you should know something. The wedding venue is on a piece of property listed under your name." And at first I didn't understand, but then she forwarded the documents, and cold realization washed over me. The venue Lena had chosen, the beautiful hilltop garden surrounded by old oak trees, belonged not to the company she assumed owned it, but to me, because decades ago, when my wife died, I bought several acres of land outside the city as an investment, and over time a developer leased part of it to build an event space, a lease that was still under my full authority. I hadn't thought about that land in years, hadn't cared, hadn't touched it, but now, suddenly, it mattered more than anything. I didn't want revenge, didn't want drama, didn't want to ruin my son's day, but I did want the truth to come out, not from my anger, but from the natural consequences of disrespect. Because disrespect always reveals itself before justice even arrives. So I drove to the venue the morning of the wedding, not to confront anyone, but to quietly meet the manager and review the rental agreement. And when I arrived, the staff were bustling around, decorating, running cables, arranging flowers, and the manager greeted me nervously, knowing exactly who I was from the documents she had seen, and she said softly, "Mr. Carter, you have full authority to cancel this event." But I shook my head and said, No, let them have their day. They made their choices. I just need one thing, and I handed her a sealed envelope with instructions to give it to the officiant. At the moment, he asked whether anyone had objections, not to object, not to disrupt, but to be delivered to my son in the most unforgettable way possible. Then I left the venue, drove home, and sat alone in my quiet living room, imagining. The ceremony I wasn't allowed to attend, trying not to let bitterness replace the love I still carried for my son. But while I sat there, the truth began to unfold at the wedding like a slow explosion. Everything was perfect, the flowers, the music, the archway, but when the officiant reached the part where he asked for any objections, he paused, opened the envelope, and read aloud a note written in my handwriting. I won't object. I only want my son to know the venue he stands on today exists because his mother and I worked our whole lives to give him a future. This land is mine, but my love was always his. Dad. And the moment he read it, the crowd murmured, the entire wedding froze, and my son's face fell as he realized the gravity of what he had done. Because suddenly he understood that the father he had cast aside was the very man who made his perfect wedding possible, and the humiliation he feared I would bring was nothing compared to the shame he brought upon himself. Lena panicked, whispering, "Why didn't you tell me?" And my son stammered, I didn't know, but ignorance does not erase the truth, and right then the venue manager approached the stage, politely apologizing to the guests and adding, "Just to clarify, this venue operates on a long-term lease under Mr. Carter. He gave full permission for today's ceremony." We thank him for his generosity, and silence washed over the entire crowd. A silence sharp enough to cut through every lie, every excuse, every justification. I wasn't there to see it, but I later heard from several people, including his childhood friend, who called me afterwards, that my son broke down crying right there at the altar, realizing he had pushed away the one person who had never stopped giving to him, never asked for anything, never turned his back. The wedding continued, but the celebration never quite recovered, and later that night, as I sat reading on my porch, I heard a car pull into my driveway, and moments later my son stood at my door, still in his wedding suit, eyes red, voice shaking as he whispered, "Dad, I'm so sorry," and he collapsed into my arms like he was 8 years old again, sobbing, saying he didn't know, he didn't mean it, he didn't think. He let Lena convince him. He thought he was doing the right thing. He was ashamed, he wanted me there, he regretted everything, but regrets don't erase wounds, they only acknowledge them. I held him because a father holds even when hurt, and when he finally calmed down, he asked, "Dad, why didn't you stop the wedding?" And I answered, "Because love isn't about revenge. If you needed to make this mistake to see the truth, then so be it." And he cried again, because the kindness he expected me not to have was the kindness that saved him. The marriage didn't last long. Lena never forgave him for not telling her about the land, and he never forgave her for turning him against his own father, and within a year, they divorced. Today my son visits every week, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, and every time before he leaves, he hugs me just a little tighter, a little longer, because he knows he almost lost me, not because of distance, but because of choices made out of pride and manipulation. But I didn't close the door on him then, and I won't now, because a father's love doesn't dissolve in disrespect. It just waits in silence until the truth brings the child home again.